of course, another aspect we want to see about the models is fairness. We absolutely want to make sure our models are making ethical predictions that aren't biased, not only against protected classes, but even against our customers. We want to make sure they get a consistent experience, an example of commercially used models, et cetera, as well. And then where we see another big area of concern in explainable AI is in privacy. We hear this about a lot. You've got GDPR. You do have to legally follow that as to what goes in your models. But more importantly, when you're using these foundational models where we do not know all of the information that has gone into them, would they accidentally disclose some of this private information or PII, perhaps protected, or something that was rescinded through the GDPR? If the model couldn't disclose that, that obviously is a big issue. So we have to have confidence as well in that privacy is protected within that. And so all of these aspects are really what goes into being truly explainable AI. And very few models can truly say they hit all of these, and that's not expected. But we need to make sure we're hitting some of them. So when we talk about traditional AI models, they've been around a lot longer. Some are inherently interpretable by nature. That really comes down to how complex is the model and what's doing. Can we decompose what's going on? Can we follow the math behind it and see what goes on there? And we see these models a lot, especially in use in financial institutions, because the very fact that they are inherently interpretable means they're defensible if you ever come up against an issue on there. So things like a decision tree, obviously you can follow the path down through the nodes of the tree and see what happened, or logistic regression. We very much understand that math and things like that. So some of these traditional AI models were inherently interpretable, and we didn't need to do as much to have some confidence in how they were working and that they work in a consistent manner. And then, when we get into neural networks and things like that, where they're making we're making like classifiers, more making a straight prediction based off of input features, then we had the ability to do, and still do, post hoc interpretability techniques, where we can basically use a couple different widely accepted methodologies for determining the feature importance, like which items contributed most to the overall prediction, which again helps us build confidence and trust in the model going forward in what it's actually doing. So, for instance, Shapley is a big one, the Shapley additive explanations. It uses basically, in a very simple form, I'm going to explain this simply, is it uses game theory to actually figure out how important each feature is to a given prediction by basically adding or removing players, aka features from the game, and then mapping a model on top to see how much their participation actually affected the overall prediction of the model. How much did the prediction change? Very simplified, but that's kind of how it works on that kind of things. And it's a great technique to use when you're working with traditional classifiers, and how they work, because we can kind of map it on top. Another technique that's been around for a bit as well, that you may have run across, is basically creating a proxy model that is in itself explainable. So like mapping a traditional logistic regression on top of a neural network is an example where you can do this, where basically what it does is it actually creates a data set by basically tweaking the data a little bit of all the different projections, and then training one of those inherently interpretable models I mentioned earlier on top of that data, and then Lime can actually calculate that. So these both give us kind of these features. You can see them here, the results here in from our product, the ModelOp Center, where we actually capture that information and can do that. And that helps provide kind of that causality portion we talked about within the overall explainable AI. But when we get to generative AI, of course, they're not simple classifiers. They're doing kind of natural language techniques on that kind of things. So they're generally just considered not interpretable. So what else can we do to do that? My favorite statement about them is that they are very fluent but not factual, which is actually kind of more scary because they're very convincing. They can convince people that what they're saying is fact because they speak very well. But often, as we know, they are not able to derive the correct answer. Like give them a simple math problem. Most of the models, they're getting better, but do pretty horrible at it. Or sometimes they just hallucinate and make things up. But they're going to say it in a very convincing manner. So how do you alleviate the fear of these hallucinations for business users and et cetera, and instill some confidence that they're okay to use these things? I do want to point out, however, that there are some early experimental techniques where people are actually trying to make them more interpretable. One of the techniques that is getting a lot of attention right now is the idea of self-explanation. It has some abilities. I've done some of this experiments here, especially if you use two different LLMs to kind of play off of each other to do that, to basically have it explain why it actually came up with these things, break it down to facts, etc. But just we fall back to that fluent but not factual things, and that we can't 100% rely on the results. So it still goes off the rails sometimes, although it can provide some insights and help develop some confidence in the fact that why it's actually responding this way. Another one we see out there quite often is visualization techniques, where basically you look at the vector node clustering to determine which factors were actually used in the outcome and can hover over them, highlight, and et cetera. But that's obviously more of an advanced technique. And I find it comes in much handier to basically do some reinforcement learning or additional training on a foundational model to come to a specific task. It's not as great at saying how good it is for your given business purpose, your use case, basically, of how you're using the model. So what can we do? Well, we've already talked a bit about the explainability and interpretability, which is going into how a model actually makes specific decisions and generates its output. So feature importance, things like that that are on there. Basically, that focuses on making the model's behavior rather understandable, so you can increase that confidence level, so that they feel good about using it, and also it's defensible as a model if you ever come into kind of an audit situation, as an example on here. So what else can we do when we get to that it's not an inherently interpretable model? Well, that's where we can start to provide traceability into the overall usage of the model, the acceptance of the model, and what's been there. So you track and document that the overall process the model followed before it's actually approved for usage within your organization. And this provides, we'll go into these in detail, but provides a lot about the model, what it's been through, helping people understand that this thing isn't just brought in off the shelf and not doing that. So one of the things it can help do is ensure that accountability and compliance was there by providing you that clear record of the overall approval process itself. So what do you need to do to actually do that? Well, that's where our solution and the others have this approach where you want to follow a well-documented and consistent process. And here you can see an example of a process within the ModelOp Center where we're actually going through and onboarding a use case and following an SR11.7 style flow to actually ensure that all of the proper steps have been taken. So part of this process is to gather as much information through the process at the appropriate times and put it in one central place to give you a kind of a single pane of glass into that information. We'll look at that later by where we can look back and actually see all the information. If you were to try to gather all this information without having some kind of an automated process, it would be pretty painful and slow. But by automating and bringing as much as you can, you make that that information available over the time. Also, you want to do things like automate standard tests that are run on all models, so you have apples to apples comparisons where appropriate. That doesn't mean the exact same test on all styles of models, because of course you got to pick the right one based on the use case, but it does mean for similar models where you're comparing them in an apple to apple situation, you do want to make sure that these tests are run in a consistent basis on that. And then this also can help promote basically compliance to any kind of regulations. Like if you're using data sets, making sure that they have been scanned by GDPR if you're under that regulation, or if you're under our SR 11.7 and have to prove that you did that. You want to make sure you do have this automated and documented process showing where you did go through all those steps at all the time, because this ultimately provides visibility for the users into the overall process that was followed, that you gathered the information, that the data you used was appropriate, and that creates the transparency that helps build trust in the model. Because remember that the trustworthiness is one of the first items in that explainable AI list, because that's really what you want: trust by your developers, trust from your customers, and overall, if you're in that situation, trust from your auditors that you are following the process to the best of your ability and within the limitations of the technology. So we're going to talk a lot about kind of building up trust in the models, because we cannot inherently interpret them and do that. So we have to do the best we can. One of the items that can help establish more of trust in the model is having proper model documentation. Now, nobody likes to create documentation. It's a slow process. It's manual. You have to run tests, automatically cut and paste. And when you're doing this in a manual time, it's very, very time consuming, prone to error. And I also find that the up front you may get great documentation and things like that, but as multiple versions of the model come out and etc., it's easy for that documentation to grow stale, where it's just old information gets carried forward and maybe not perhaps readdressed and etc. on that kind of things. So having to do that all manually just doesn't result in a great experience overall. So one of the things ModelOp Center does is we provide the idea of basically leveraging all that information you're gathering through both the process and through the model inventory and the automated tests you run to automate the generation of the documentation as much as possible, so that data is always fresh on that kind of things. And one of the other important items is having an appropriate level of documentation for the consumer of that documentation. So you don't want just one, mega document with all the details. You do want that where you have a detailed review document that's for the heavy consumers or things like that the data scientists who really want to get underneath the model. But we've seen the rise of model cards from places like Hugging Face, et cetera, as well. That's for just straight out consumers of the model, the people who might want to use it. It's a shorter form of basically the information that might be in a review document, but it's in a very consistent and digestible format. So you want to be able to automate the generation of all of these different kinds of documents, because you don't want to have to create them all yourself. And that's something ModelOp Center has provided, is this idea of templated document generation, where we can generate model cards and review documents and et cetera from the detailed information we already have, and that's automated, and then can provide overall that level again of trust into the model through understanding the documentation work that's gone in that as well. Another item that really helps in establishing trust is establishing consistent baseline metrics. By automating gathering the baseline, you know that before the model is ever deployed, you actually have something to start with as a comparison. So when we look at things like for instance, sentiment analysis is a perfect one that can often be used with like a chatbot to see kind of how it's actually performing out there on that. But the first run doesn't really tell you anything. A negative sentiment or a positive sentiment analysis or this kinds of things doesn't say that it's working correctly or incorrectly. Or another thing like we can see here is the top parts of speech, top kind of words by parts of speech, where we actually can gather like that kind of information about what kinds of words is it using the most, et cetera. And again, that doesn't tell us a whole lot on the first run. But then what your process can do is automate actually rerunning these on a consistent basis as new data coming in. And then as you see on the top, looking at the drift from the original. It's never going to be exactly the same, but if we see a consistent veer off of the baseline and it's going out somewhere else, or the types of words it's saying are entirely different than it used to say, it can be a good indicator that something is wrong. And why do we do all this? Well, not only detecting if there's potentially a problem, but it also helps the consumers, again, have more trust that somebody's watching this model, somebody's looking at it, somebody's keeping an eye on what's going on here and providing us that kind of oversight, and then ready access to it for consumers of the model so they can look themselves in the inventory and say, hey, yeah, look at these 5 different versions. How are they comparing against each other? Oh, it looks like it's worked really well for this use case over time. My use case is similar to that. So I think this will perform well for me. And again, you build that trust. And also, again, you build an audit defense. And that if someone were to come in and look and say, hey, if something crazy happened and went off the rails, yeah, look, we've been watching it. We've been doing our best. And that's, all you can really do at the end of the day, especially with these non-traditional models. Another item that really helps establish trust in the model is basically collecting attestations from experts within your organization that they've looked over all of this information that you've gathered about the details of the model, and that they've kind of thrown their weight behind it and say they believe this is an appropriate use for the model. These are the weaknesses we found. These are the things we've done. So where they can actually kind of give their approval at different stages within that process. So, you've obviously got the initial model development, but you're going to want to conduct annual reviews as well on occasion to say, how well is this still actually performing? You bring on a new vendor model. Well, you may know very little about it. It's kind of a black box and you have to do the best you can. So you want an approval process for that. And then also, whenever you do detect an exceptional condition, making sure somebody's reviewed it, looked at it, said, yeah, this is a one-off, this is not, and getting those approvals and attestations that contain the information about the who, what, when, and why as to why things go on. Because then again, there's an oversight to these models. They're not just off running around doing their own thing. And that's going to be extremely important when we get to things like agentic AI and others where they're making decisions for you. You're going to want to make sure that somebody is kind of reviewing these and keeping information on there to keep that trust up. And then ultimately, what that gives us is the ability, by gathering all this information through the process, is looking back within your organization and understanding where you are using, for instance, foundational models. So something like Llama 2 or ChatGPT 4 on that. Where is it being used in your organization, and how is it actually there? Has the use case that you've decided to use it for actually been approved specifically for generative AI? And or has the regulations been followed? So for instance, when we actually talk about the EU regulation, what's going on there, there's very specific categories where the AI cannot be used in a human unsupervised manner when it comes to like health and safety and things like that. And if you do, you have to submit very specific documentation about the process to the EU themselves, proving that this has been done. So have you done that for all those uses within your organization? And that's why you need this ability to have an inventory that ties all these use cases back to the foundational models, the new lane chain code, the whatever else you're using, and give you that single pane of glass into where all these things are going on, and making sure that all of the items are done, as well as it will have the side benefit of if you ever are upgrading models or reviewing new models for usage, you'll be able to find where they're being used and actually be able to deploy them on that as well. And then, monitors themselves that going on. We talked about how you want the automated ability to run these back tests on there. Well, the use case behind the monitor is really important, especially when we come down to things like generative AI, where it's not just a simple predictor where we can run AUC or these kinds of standard controls on it. Instead, we may have an LLM running a summarization technique where it's used just to take an original document and pull out the highlight points on that. That's going to require one type of test, like ModelOp Center has an Esper cosine similarity test for being able to actually do that. But another might be, as I said, actually talking to a user and providing them answers like a traditional chatbot. In that case, we might want to look out for bias, like we do persona protected class detection. Basically, we put protected classes into personas and provide the ability to actually make sure we get consistent results when only items we change in personas are protected classes. You want to be doing these kinds of things, and then when you find issues, you want to generate exception reports so somebody can go out and look at it and make sure that the model is behaving there, and then that actually goes, if you're outside of that range, you want to know and make sure that something actually happens within your organization. Seek out those approvals, like we talked about earlier on that. So ultimately, this leads to the ability to prove that you're adhering to all the regulations that are out there. You can show an auditor the exact path you went through and that you did all these things. You did your annual reviews, you did your initial attestations, you've got your baselines, and you've been monitoring that. And ModelOp Center does provide that comprehensive view of every step within the process in a way that you can also define the process, which is important. And as new regulations come onto plate or new steps need to be added, the solution needs the ability to actually be modifiable without modifying the product. And that's one of the things we do, and that we found with our customers, that provides that instant auditability, but also that accountability within your own organization, that everybody is following the process. And that, again, increases that trust to the solution as well. Well, why are we doing all of this? Well, the importance of trust and getting it right really comes down to the fact that when you get failures, you not only look bad, you lose money. I mean, one that I found kind of funny was McDonald's when they put out their first experimental using AI at the drive-throughs. There's TikTok videos of people going in and trying to just cancel an order, and they end up with 260 orders of chicken McNuggets. I don't think anybody wants that and that kind of things, and it makes your company look bad. Or it can be even worse, where iTutor's group recruiting AI model was actually rejecting older applicants consistently. Anyone older than 55, it was not accepting. And it resulted in a fine of $365,000 to the company. And I think none of us want that. There's other instances which are even, we talked about the moral and ethical applications, where healthcare algorithm that was being used by multiple people within the industry was ignoring Black patients' needs for getting high-risk care, getting flagged to say they needed additional care. That has real moral implications within the industry, and we don't want these kinds of things. And then we get down to even just the simple thing of, again, a lawyer used this and it hallucinated a bunch of prior law, and of course this made the top news and everything. I can't imagine that lawyer's career is doing as well as it used to. And on top of that, he was fined $5,000. So again, you need that trust within the organization. So what do you actually need to do when we're talking about building the trust? We've already talked about the things, but get visibility, have an inventory that scans across all of the items and includes not only your internal models, but third-party vendor models, so you can identify where you might have that liability. You want to, where the models can be explainable and interpretable, absolutely. You want to use those techniques and automate them, and ModelOp Center does that. But you also will need the traceability, the overall adherence to regulations and processes. And again, we've been reiterating this, establish the trust by having all of those items in place so that people can feel confident in using those models and not run into problems within their business. And you really need to do all this. You can see it's a complex space. We need that AI governance software in place, which ModelOp solution does, to provide that minimum viable governance on that. So if you want to find out more, please, the links are right up here, and you can actually get some more information in a live demo. Thank you, Jay.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tim. It was a great, great topic to dive into. Really appreciate your expertise in taking us through that. I know there's a lot to cover in there as well, so we're always happy to meet with you one-on-one to talk through your particular needs around AI governance or Gen AI. So as Jim said, you can request a meeting or a demo, and please continue to register for these webinars. We love talking to y'all, and I will send out the recording and the slides for your reference. We will be hosting another webinar in December, about mid-December, before the holiday break sets in. We're going to do a 2024 recap on issues and trends in AI governance and a 2025 look ahead. So we hope to see you all there, and we'll send out the announcement for that webinar where you can register for it in email. So until next time, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join our webinar, and we hope you have a great Thanksgiving and holiday. Take it easy. Bye, everybody.